The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace grounds as Camilla stood at her bedroom window, watching the gardeners tend to the rose bushes below. She had always found comfort in this view, the perfectly manicured lawns stretching toward the ancient oak trees that had stood sentinel for centuries. Today, however, something felt different. The air seemed heavy with an unspoken tension that had been building for weeks. Camilla adjusted her pearl necklace, a nervous habit she had developed over the years. The palace had been her home for so long now that she could barely remember life before these grand walls and endless corridors. Every morning brought the same routine: breakfast in the morning room, reviewing correspondence with her private secretary, and attending to her various charitable duties. But, lately, the routine felt fragile, as if it might shatter at any moment. The knock at her door came precisely at 8 o'clock, just as it had every morning for the past 15 years. "Come in," she called, expecting to see Margaret, her lady-in-waiting, with the morning tea service. Instead, she found herself facing a stern-looking man in a dark suit whom she had never seen before. "Your Royal Highness," the man said with a slight bow that seemed more perfunctory than respectful. "I am Mr. Harrison from the Royal Household's legal department. I need to speak with you about a matter of considerable urgency." Camilla's heart began to race, though she maintained her composed exterior. "Of course. Please, have a seat." She gestured toward the sitting area by the fireplace, but Mr. Harrison remained standing. "I'm afraid this conversation requires your immediate attention, ma'am. There have been certain developments regarding your position within the royal family that need to be addressed without delay." The words hit her like a physical blow, though she had been expecting something like this for weeks. The whispered conversations that stopped when she entered a room, the subtle changes in how staff members addressed her, the mysterious meetings her husband had been attending without explanation, it all suddenly made terrible sense. "What kind of developments?" she managed to ask, her voice steady despite the turmoil building inside her chest. Mr. Harrison opened a leather folder and withdrew a thick document. "Ma'am, I regret to inform you that there has been a formal review of your status within the royal household. Following extensive deliberations, it has been determined that your continued residence at the palace is no longer appropriate." Camilla felt the room spinning slightly. She gripped the back of a nearby chair to steady herself. "I don't understand. This is my home, my husband, and I have lived here for years. Our entire life is here." "Yes, ma'am, I understand this is difficult. However, the decision has been made at the highest levels. There are concerns about public perception and the future direction of the monarchy that require immediate action." The morning light streaming through the windows suddenly seemed harsh and unforgiving. Camilla walked to her dressing table and sat down heavily, staring at her reflection in the ornate mirror. The woman looking back at her appeared older than her years, worn down by the constant pressure of public scrutiny and the impossible task of trying to win over a nation that had never fully accepted her. "When?" she asked quietly. "The transition must begin immediately, ma'am. We have prepared temporary accommodation for you, and arrangements are being made for your personal effects to be relocated." Immediately, the word came out as barely more than a whisper. "But what about Charles? Surely he knows about this? Where is he?" Mr. Harrison's expression remained carefully neutral. "His Majesty is currently in Scotland attending to urgent matters of state. He has been informed of the situation and supports the decision." The betrayal cut deeper than any public criticism ever had. To be abandoned by the man she had loved and supported through decades of challenges felt like the ultimate humiliation. Camilla closed her eyes, trying to process the enormity of what was happening. "Ma'am, I must stress the importance of handling this transition with discretion. The palace is prepared to make arrangements for your comfort and privacy during this difficult time, but cooperation is essential." "And if I refuse?" Camilla asked, opening her eyes to meet his gaze in the mirror. "Ma'am, I don't believe that would be in anyone's best interests. The decision has been made through proper channels, and resistance would only make the situation more challenging for everyone involved." Camilla stood up slowly, her legs feeling unsteady beneath her. The room that had been her sanctuary now felt like a prison. Every familiar object, the photographs on her bedside table, the books she had been reading, the silk scarves draped over the chair, suddenly seemed to belong to someone else's life. "How much time do I have to prepare?" "We have arranged for packing services to begin this afternoon, ma'am. Your departure has been scheduled for tomorrow morning to avoid any unnecessary attention from the media." "Tomorrow morning. Less than 24 hours to dismantle a life that had taken decades to build." Camilla walked to her wardrobe and opened the doors, staring at the rows of carefully organized clothing. Each outfit held memories, state dinners, charity events, family gatherings. Now they would all be packed into boxes like remnants of someone else's existence. "Where will I be going?" she asked, though part of her didn't want to know the answer. "A private residence has been secured for you in the countryside. It's quite comfortable and will provide the privacy you'll need during this adjustment period." Privacy. The word had a hollow ring to it. Privacy was what you gave someone when you no longer wanted them to be part of your world. Privacy was exile disguised as consideration. Margaret appeared in the doorway, her face pale with shock. "Ma'am? I heard, is it true?" Camilla looked at the woman who had been her constant companion and closest confidant for so many years. Margaret's loyalty had never wavered, even when the rest of the world seemed determined to find fault with everything Camilla did. "Yes, Margaret. It's true. We'll be leaving tomorrow." Margaret's eyes filled with tears, but she quickly composed herself. "Then, we have work to do, ma'am. I'll begin making arrangements immediately." Mr. Harrison cleared his throat. "Actually, the relocation will be handled by professional services. Mrs. Patterson's assistance won't be necessary." The implication was clear. Even Margaret would be taken from her. Camilla felt another piece of her life being stripped away. "Margaret has been with me for 15 years. Surely there's no reason she can't continue in her position." "I'm afraid the new arrangements don't include provisions for current staff members, ma'am. Fresh personnel will be assigned as needed." Camilla wanted to scream, to demand explanations, to fight against the systematic dismantling of everything she had worked so hard to build. Instead, she nodded calmly, years of royal training allowing her to maintain dignity even in the face of devastating news. "I understand. Perhaps Margaret could assist me with personal items today, before the professional services arrive." Mr. Harrison consulted his folder again. "That would be acceptable, provided everything is completed by this evening." After he left, Camilla and Margaret sat in silence for several minutes. The magnitude of what was happening seemed too large to discuss in normal conversation. Finally, Margaret spoke. "Ma'am, where will you go? What will you do?" Camilla had no answer. For so many years, her identity had been defined by her role within the royal family. She was Charles's wife, a patron of numerous charities, a public figure who attended state functions and ribbon-cutting ceremonies. Without those roles, who was she? "I suppose I'll figure that out when I get there," she said, attempting a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. They began the heartbreaking task of sorting through her possessions. Each item required a decision: keep, donate, or store. The photographs were the hardest. Images of happier times, family celebrations, moments when she had believed she truly belonged in this world. Now they seemed like evidence of a beautiful dream that had turned into a nightmare. As the afternoon progressed, word of her departure began to spread quietly through the palace staff. People who had worked alongside her for years stopped by to offer their condolences and support. Many were genuinely shocked by the news. Others, Camilla noticed, seemed relieved, as if a burden they had been carrying was finally being lifted. The chef brought her favorite afternoon tea, prepared with extra care. The head gardener delivered a bouquet of roses from her private garden. These small gestures of kindness meant more to her than any grand ceremony ever had. By evening, most of her personal belongings were packed into neat boxes, labeled, and ready for transport. The room that had been her private retreat now looked sterile and impersonal, like a hotel room prepared for the next guest. Camilla stood at the window one last time, watching the sun set over the gardens. Tomorrow, someone else would enjoy this view. Someone else would call this place home. The thought filled her with a sadness so profound that she had to grip the window frame to keep from falling. Margaret knocked softly and entered with a cup of hot chocolate, just as she had done countless times before. "I thought you might need this, ma'am." "Thank you, Margaret, for everything. I hope you know how much your loyalty has meant to me." "Ma'am, perhaps this isn't the end. Perhaps it's just a new beginning." Camilla wished she could share Margaret's optimism, but she couldn't see beyond the immediate pain of losing everything she had worked so hard to achieve. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and an uncertain future. Tonight, she would grieve for the life that was ending and try to find the strength to face whatever came next. As she prepared for bed in her familiar surroundings one last time, Camilla reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had known from the beginning that marrying into the royal family would never be easy. The public had been skeptical, the media had been harsh, and even some family members had been slow to accept her. But she had persevered, believing that love and dedication would eventually win people over. Now, lying in the bed where she had spent so many nights planning charity events and royal duties, she wondered if she had been naive to think that effort and good intentions would be enough. The monarchy was an institution that valued tradition above all else, and perhaps she had never truly fit into their vision of the future. The clock on her bedside table ticked quietly through the hours, marking the final moments of her life as a working member of the royal family. Tomorrow would bring a new chapter, one written far from the palace walls and the public eye. Whether it would be better or worse than what she was leaving behind remained to be seen. As sleep finally claimed her, Camilla's last thought was of the roses in her garden, blooming beautifully despite the thorns that protected them. Perhaps, she thought, there was a lesson in that resilience that would serve her well in the days to come. The morning of her departure arrived with cruel indifference. Camilla woke before dawn, her body refusing to sleep despite her exhaustion. The palace was eerily quiet, as if even the building itself was holding its breath. She dressed carefully in a simple navy suit, choosing clothes that would serve her well in whatever life awaited her beyond these walls. Margaret had prepared breakfast, but neither woman could manage more than a few bites. They sat in the morning room where Camilla had enjoyed thousands of meals, now saying goodbye to this simple pleasure along with everything else. "The cars will be here at 9 o'clock sharp," Margaret informed her quietly. "Mr. Harrison wants to ensure a discreet departure." Camilla nodded, understanding that even her exit from royal life must be choreographed to avoid embarrassing the institution. She wondered if anyone would miss her work with the Literacy Foundation or her visits to the elderly care homes. Probably not, she thought bitterly. There would always be someone else ready to cut ribbons and make polite conversation. The professional packers had worked through the night, and now her entire life was reduced to a convoy of unmarked vans waiting in the palace courtyard. Camilla watched from her window as her furniture, books, and clothing were loaded with efficient precision. These strangers handling her most personal possessions felt like the final violation of her privacy. At exactly 9 o'clock, a black sedan pulled up to the palace's private entrance. Mr. Harrison emerged, followed by two security officers Camilla didn't recognize. The message was clear. She was no longer under royal protection, but neither was she free to leave on her own terms. Margaret accompanied her down the grand staircase one last time. Their footsteps echoed in the marble hallway, a sound that would haunt Camilla for months to come. Portraits of previous royals seemed to watch her departure with silent judgment, as if her expulsion was merely the latest chapter in centuries of palace intrigue. At the entrance, a small group of staff members had gathered to say goodbye. The sight of their genuine sadness almost broke Camilla's composure. These people had known her not as a public figure, but as someone who remembered their birthdays and asked about their children. Their tears meant more to her than any official ceremony ever could. Mrs. Henderson, the head housekeeper, stepped forward with a small wrapped package. "Something to remember us by, ma'am. And to remember that you'll always be welcome in our hearts." Camilla accepted the gift with trembling hands, not trusting herself to speak. Inside the simple wrapping paper was a photograph of the palace staff taken at last year's Christmas party. She was in the center, laughing at something someone had said, surrounded by faces full of genuine affection and respect. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Thank you all." Mr. Harrison cleared his throat impatiently. "Ma'am, we really must proceed. The schedule is quite tight." Camilla took one last look at the entrance hall with its soaring ceiling and crystal chandeliers. This place had been the backdrop for some of the most important moments of her adult life, meeting foreign dignitaries, hosting charity events, celebrating family milestones. Now it felt like a museum of someone else's memories. The car ride through London was a blur of familiar landmarks seen through tinted windows. Parliament, Westminster Abbey, Buckingham Palace itself, all the places that had defined her public life, now felt like monuments to someone else's existence. Camilla stared out at the city where she had once been recognized and respected, wondering if she would ever be able to walk these streets again as anything other than a former royal curiosity. The countryside house was located in a remote part of Gloucestershire, far from the media attention that would inevitably follow news of her departure from royal duties. As their car turned up a long gravel drive, Camilla got her first glimpse of what would be her new home. The house was pleasant enough, a Georgian manor with ivy-covered walls and well-maintained gardens. Under different circumstances, she might have found it charming. But knowing it was essentially a gilded prison made every beautiful detail feel like a mockery of her former life. Mrs. Reynolds, the housekeeper who had been assigned to manage the property, greeted them at the door. She was a capable-looking woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a gentle manner that immediately put Camilla at ease. "Welcome, Your Royal High. Welcome, Mrs. Parker Bowles," she said, correcting herself quickly. "I hope you'll find everything satisfactory." Even her name was being erased, Camilla realized. The titles and honors that had taken years to earn were being stripped away as efficiently as her possessions had been packed. Soon, she would just be Camilla Parker Bowles again, as if the royal years had never happened. The house tour revealed comfortable but modest accommodations. There was a sitting room with a fireplace, a small dining room, a well-equipped kitchen, and 3 bedrooms upstairs. Everything was tasteful and clean, but it felt lifeless compared to the grandeur and history of the palace. "I've prepared the master bedroom for you," Mrs. Reynolds explained as they climbed the narrow staircase. "The other rooms can be used however you see fit. There's also a small study where you might work on correspondence or reading." Work on what? Camilla wondered. Her royal duties had been terminated along with her residency. Her charities would find new patrons, her committees would function without her input, and her calendar was now completely empty for the first time in decades. The afternoon brought a parade of delivery trucks as her possessions were installed in their new locations. Watching her formal portraits and royal memorabilia being hung in this modest house felt surreal. The items that had once seemed so important now looked out of place and slightly ridiculous. Mrs. Reynolds proved to be remarkably tactful about the situation. She went about her duties without asking probing questions or expressing opinions about the circumstances that had brought Camilla here. Her professional discretion was both appreciated and somehow deeply sad. Even the hired help understood that this was a subject too painful to discuss. That evening, Camilla sat alone in her new sitting room, trying to make sense of her dramatically changed circumstances. The silence was overwhelming after years of living in a place that buzzed with constant activity. No footsteps in corridors, no quiet conversations between staff members, no phones ringing with urgent requests for her attention. She opened the package Mrs. Henderson had given her and spent a long time studying the Christmas photograph. Everyone looked so happy and optimistic. She tried to remember what she had been thinking about that day, what plans and dreams had filled her mind. Whatever they were, they belonged to someone else now. The phone rang suddenly, breaking the oppressive quiet. Camilla's heart leaped. Perhaps it was Charles calling to explain, to apologize, to tell her this had all been a terrible mistake. Instead, she heard the voice of her solicitor, Mr. Pemberton. "Mrs. Parker Bowles, I hope you're settling in well. I'm calling to discuss some practical matters regarding your new circumstances." "What kind of practical matters?" Camilla asked, though she dreaded the answer. "Well, there are financial arrangements to be finalized, questions about your future commitments, and various legal documents that require your attention." Financial arrangements. She hadn't even thought about money. For years, her needs had been met automatically by the royal purse. Now she would need to manage household budgets and personal expenses like an ordinary citizen. The prospect was both terrifying and oddly liberating. "I'll need some time to process everything," she told Mr. Pemberton. "Perhaps we could schedule a meeting next week?" "Of course. Take all the time you need. This is undoubtedly a significant adjustment." After hanging up, Camilla poured herself a glass of wine and sat by the window overlooking her new garden. The grounds were well-maintained, but modest compared to the vast palace estates. There was a small rose garden that reminded her painfully of the one she was leaving behind. Mrs. Reynolds knocked softly and entered with a tea tray. "I thought you might appreciate something warm before bed," she said kindly. "That's very thoughtful. Please, sit with me for a moment if you have time." Mrs. Reynolds accepted the invitation, clearly understanding that her employer needed human company more than formal service at the moment. "This must be very difficult for you," the housekeeper said gently. Camilla was surprised by the direct acknowledgement of her situation. Most people had been carefully avoiding any reference to the dramatic change in her circumstances. "Yes, it is," she admitted. "I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do with myself now." "Perhaps that's not such a bad thing," Mrs. Reynolds suggested carefully. "Sometimes when everything we think we know about our lives is taken away, we discover parts of ourselves we never had the chance to explore." It was a surprisingly philosophical observation from someone Camilla had just met. She found herself genuinely curious about this woman who seemed to understand something about loss and reinvention. "Have you experienced something like this yourself?" Camilla asked. Mrs. Reynolds smiled sadly. "My husband died 5 years ago. We had run a hotel together for 25 years. When he passed, I sold the business and Had to figure out who I was without him, and without the work that had defined us both. I'm sorry for your loss. That must have been devastating. It was. But I also discovered that I was stronger than I knew, and that there were possibilities I had never considered when my life was so firmly structured around one identity. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, two women who had lost the foundations of their former lives, but were still standing. Camilla felt a small spark of something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. Mrs. Reynolds, would you mind if I asked you to call me Camilla? I think I'd like to try being just Camilla for a while. Of course, Camilla. And please, call me Janet. As the evening deepened, Camilla found herself talking more freely than she had in years. Without the constant awareness of protocol and public perception, she could simply be a woman trying to make sense of a dramatic life change. Janet listened without judgment, offering occasional insights drawn from her own experience of rebuilding after loss. When she finally went to bed, Camilla felt exhausted, but somehow lighter than she had in months. The pain of leaving her royal life was still sharp, but alongside it was a growing curiosity about what might come next. For the first time in decades, her future was entirely unwritten. The bedroom was comfortable but simple, with none of the grandeur she had grown accustomed to. As she prepared for sleep, Camilla realized she couldn't remember the last time she had gone to bed without reviewing a schedule for the following day. Tomorrow would bring no appointments, no obligations, no expectations to meet. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. She pulled the covers up and listened to the country sounds outside her window: owls calling, wind in the trees, the distant sound of a train passing through the valley. These were sounds she had forgotten during her years in the city palace. Maybe Janet was right. Maybe losing everything she thought she knew about herself would allow her to discover who she really was underneath all the titles and duties. Maybe this exile wasn't an ending, but a beginning she never could have imagined. As sleep finally claimed her, Camilla's last conscious thought was a promise to herself. She would not waste this opportunity to start over. No matter how painful the beginning might be. 3 weeks into her new life, Camilla established a routine that would have seemed impossible during her royal years. She woke naturally with the sunrise, without alarm clocks or pressing schedules. Her first stop was always the kitchen, where she made her own breakfast, a simple pleasure that had been denied to her for years by well-meaning staff who insisted on managing every aspect of her daily life. Janet had proven to be more than just a housekeeper. She was becoming a friend and confidant. Their morning conversations over coffee became the highlight of Camilla's day, offering a kind of honest human connection that had been rare in her previous life, surrounded by protocol and careful deference. "There's a letter for you from London," Janet mentioned one morning, placing an official-looking envelope beside Camilla's plate. The return address bore the insignia of the royal household's legal department. Camilla stared at the envelope without opening it. Whatever news it contained could only make her situation more final, more real. She had been hoping that someone would contact her to explain the decision, to offer some path back to her former life, or at least to express regret about how everything had been handled. "Bad news?" Janet asked gently. "I suspect so. Nothing good ever comes in envelopes that formal." Camilla finally opened the letter, scanning its contents quickly. Her face grew pale as she read. "They're officially announcing my withdrawal from public life," she said quietly. "Effective immediately, all my patronages will be transferred to other members of the royal family. My charities are being reassigned, my committees dissolved, and my calendar cleared indefinitely." The finality of it hit her like a physical blow. Every organization she had worked with for years, every cause she had championed, every relationship she had built through her royal duties was being severed with bureaucratic efficiency. She was being erased from public life as thoroughly as if she had never existed. Janet reached across the table and covered Camilla's hand with her own. "I'm sorry. That's incredibly harsh. The worst part is that they're presenting it as my choice. Listen to this. Mrs. Parker Bowles has decided to step back from public duties to focus on private family matters. They're making it sound like I wanted this. Why would they do that? Because it's cleaner for them. If they admit they forced me out, it raises questions about why. This way, I look like someone who chose family over duty, which fits the narrative they've always preferred about me." Camilla folded the letter carefully and set it aside. The morning sunshine streaming through the kitchen window suddenly felt less warm, the cheerful yellow walls less inviting. Everything around her remained the same, but she felt fundamentally changed by the formal severing of her ties to the life she had known. Later that morning, she decided to walk into the nearby village for the first time since her arrival. The exercise would do her good, and she needed to start learning about the community where she would be living. Janet offered to drive her, but Camilla felt ready to venture out on her own. The walk took her along country lanes lined with hedgerows and wildflowers. Spring was arriving with determined beauty, and she found herself noticing details that would have been lost in the rush of her former life. A family of rabbits feeding in a meadow, the intricate construction of a bird's nest, the way morning light filtered through new leaves. The village of Little Thornfield was exactly what she had expected, a cluster of stone cottages around a village green, with a small church, a post office, and a pub called the Crown and Anchor. Ironic, Camilla thought, that even in exile she couldn't escape royal symbolism. Her first stop was the post office, which doubled as a general store. The elderly woman behind the counter looked up with polite curiosity as Camilla entered. She had dressed simply in jeans and a sweater, hoping to blend in, but she sensed immediate recognition in the woman's expression. "Good morning," Camilla said cheerfully, trying to project normalcy. "I'm new to the area." Camilla Parker Bowles. "Oh yes, dear. You're staying at Rosemary Cottage, aren't you? I'm Mrs. Whitfield. My husband and I run this place." The woman's voice was kind but cautious, as if she wasn't sure how to address someone whose royal status was unclear. "That's right. I'm hoping to be here for quite some time, so I thought I should introduce myself and learn about the community." Mrs. Whitfield relaxed visibly. "Well, that's lovely. We don't get many newcomers, especially not ones planning to stay. Are you retiring to the countryside?" The question was innocent enough, but it forced Camilla to confront the reality of how she would explain her presence here. She couldn't very well announce that she had been expelled from the royal family, but she needed some story that would satisfy natural curiosity. "Something like that," she said carefully. "I've been involved in public work for many years, and I decided it was time to step back and live more quietly." It wasn't entirely untrue, though it certainly wasn't the whole truth. Mrs. Whitfield seemed satisfied with the explanation and began telling her about village life, the weekly market, the amateur dramatic society, the monthly book club that met in the church hall. "We're always looking for new blood in our activities," Mrs. Whitfield said enthusiastically. "Mrs. Thornsby runs the book club, and she's desperate for someone with a bit of education to help with discussions. Half the members never finish the books." Camilla found herself genuinely interested. When was the last time she had read a book for pleasure rather than preparation for a public engagement? When had she last participated in any activity simply because she enjoyed it? "That sounds wonderful," she said. "What are you reading this month?" "Oh, something about a woman starting over after her husband dies. I can't remember the title, but Mrs. Thornsby chose it. She says it's about resilience and finding yourself later in life." The description hit uncomfortably close to home, but Camilla managed to maintain her composure. "I'd like to join, if that's possible." "Of course, dear. We meet this Thursday evening at 7. I'll tell Mrs. Thornsby to expect you." Camilla left the post office feeling oddly accomplished. She had successfully navigated her first social interaction as an ordinary village resident. No one had curtsied or called her "Your Royal Highness," and the conversation had been refreshingly normal. Her next stop was the small church of St. Mary's. The building was centuries old, with worn stone steps and a graveyard that spoke of generations of village families. Camilla had always found churches peaceful, but during her royal years, even worship had become a public performance with carefully orchestrated arrivals and departures. The church was empty except for an elderly man arranging flowers at the altar. He looked up as she entered, offering a warm smile. "Good morning. I'm Father Michael. You must be our new resident at Rosemary Cottage." "Word travels fast in small villages," Camilla observed with amusement. "Indeed it does. Mrs. Whitfield called to tell me you might be interested in joining our community activities. I hope you'll consider worshiping with us. We're a small congregation, but we're welcoming to newcomers." Camilla walked slowly through the church, admiring the simple beauty of the stained glass windows and hand-carved pews. "It's lovely. Very peaceful. We like to think so. There's something to be said for worship without cameras and crowds, don't you think?" The comment was made innocently, but Camilla caught the subtle acknowledgement of her background. Father Michael knew who she was, but was choosing not to make an issue of it. "Yes," she said quietly. "There definitely is." They talked for a few more minutes about the history of the church and the community it served. Father Michael mentioned that they were always in need of volunteers for various charitable activities, helping elderly parishioners, organizing food drives, visiting the local care home. I'd be interested in helping, Camilla said, surprising herself with the immediacy of her response. I have experience with charitable work. Wonderful. Though I should warn you, our approach here is quite hands-on. No ceremonial check presentations or ribbon cuttings, just rolling up your sleeves and getting involved. The idea of practical, anonymous charity work appealed to Camilla immensely. For years, her charitable activities had been carefully choreographed events designed as much for positive publicity as for actual help. The chance to contribute without fanfare or recognition felt like a return to something more authentic. Walking back to the cottage, Camilla reflected on her morning adventures. For the first time in weeks, she felt energized rather than defeated. The prospect of joining the book club, attending church services, and volunteering in the community gave her something to look forward to beyond the daily routine of exile. Janet was working in the garden when she returned, tending to the rose bushes that lined the front path. "How was your expedition to civilization?" she asked with a smile. "Surprisingly encouraging. I think I might actually like living here." "That's wonderful to hear. You seemed so lost when you first arrived." "I was lost. I think I still am, in many ways. But maybe being lost isn't always a bad thing. Maybe it's the only way to find something new." That afternoon, Camilla sat in her small study and began the process of officially resigning from the various boards and committees that had filled her royal calendar. Each letter was a small goodbye to a different aspect of her former life. But she found the task less painful than she had expected. The literacy foundation that had been her special passion was the hardest to release. She had spent years developing programs and visiting schools, genuinely believing she was making a difference in children's lives. Now someone else would carry on that work, and she could only hope they would bring the same enthusiasm to the role. But as she sealed the final letter, Camilla realized that her commitment to literacy didn't have to end with her royal duties. Perhaps she could find ways to support reading and education here in Little Thornfield, working directly with local schools and libraries without the pomp and protocol that had surrounded her previous efforts. The thought sparked an excitement she hadn't felt in months. Instead of mourning the loss of her official patronages, maybe she could create something new and more meaningful in this quiet corner of the countryside. That evening, she called her solicitor to discuss the practicalities of her changed circumstances. The financial arrangements were adequate, but modest compared to her previous lifestyle. More importantly, she was legally free to pursue any activities she chose, as long as she avoided anything that might embarrass the royal family or compete with their current charitable efforts. "So I could start a small literacy program in a rural community?" she asked. "Absolutely. As long as you maintain a low profile and avoid any connection to your former royal status, you're free to engage in charitable work. And if I wanted to write about my experiences or speak publicly about issues I care about, that would be more complicated. There are confidentiality agreements and concerns about public perception that would need to be carefully managed." Camilla understood. She was free to rebuild her life, but only within carefully defined boundaries. Still, those boundaries felt more spacious than the rigid protocol that had governed her every move for so many years. As she prepared for bed that night, Camilla felt genuinely optimistic for the first time since leaving the palace. Tomorrow she would begin reading the book club selection, and she would start researching literacy programs that might work in a rural setting. She had work to do again, meaningful work that no one could take away from her. The royal chapter of her life was closing, but perhaps something even better was beginning to unfold. 2 months into her new life in Little Thornfield, Camilla had established herself as a quiet but valued member of the community. The book club had welcomed her enthusiastically, and she found genuine pleasure in the spirited discussions that took place in the church hall every Thursday evening. Mrs. Thornsby, despite her initial nervousness about having someone with royal connections in the group, had relaxed once she realized that Camilla was genuinely interested in literature rather than turning every meeting into a social event. The transformation wasn't lost on Janet, who watched with growing admiration as her employer slowly shed the careful restraint that had characterized her early days at Rosemary Cottage. Camilla laughed more easily now, spoke without constantly monitoring her words for potential misinterpretation, and had developed genuine friendships with people who knew nothing about protocol or precedence. It was on a rainy Tuesday morning in early May that the peaceful rhythm of her new life was shattered. Camilla was reading in the sitting room when Janet burst through the front door, her face flushed with urgent concern. "Camilla, you need to see this immediately," she said, holding up her phone. "It's all over the news. The headline on the screen made Camilla's blood run cold. Camilla's exile. Inside story of royal family's cruel betrayal. Below it was a photograph of her leaving the palace, taken from a distance, but clearly recognizable. The article promised exclusive details about her forced departure and shocking revelations about the circumstances that led to her banishment. How did they find out? Camilla whispered, taking the phone to read the full article. The story was devastatingly accurate in its basic facts while being wildly speculative about the motivations behind her exile. It painted her as a victim of palace intrigue, abandoned by her husband, and cast out by jealous courtiers who had never accepted her place in the royal family. Worse, it gave detailed information about her current location and living arrangements. The reporter claims to have spoken to palace sources, Janet said grimly. Someone with inside knowledge gave them this information. Camilla felt sick. The careful anonymity she had built in Little Thornfield was destroyed. Soon, reporters would descend on the village, photographers would camp outside her cottage, and the peaceful life she had been constructing would become impossible. I have to leave, she said quietly. I can't bring that circus to this community. These people have been so kind to me, and I won't repay them by turning their village into a media zoo. Where will you go? Camilla had no answer. The cottage was the only refuge that had been offered to her, and now even that was compromised. She called Mr. Harrison at the royal household, but he was unavailable. His assistant informed her coldly that the palace would not be commenting on private family matters, and that she should direct all inquiries to her personal solicitor. The message was clear: she was on her own. By afternoon, the first reporters had arrived in Little Thornfield. Camilla watched from her window as unfamiliar cars cruised slowly down the village's main street, their occupants clearly searching for her cottage. Mrs. Whitfield called to warn her that strangers had been asking questions at the post office, and Father Michael stopped by to offer the church as a sanctuary if needed. This is exactly what I was afraid of, Camilla told Janet as they watched the television then set up equipment on the village green. I'm toxic. Everywhere I go, I bring chaos and unwanted attention. That's not true, and you know it. This isn't your fault. Someone at the palace deliberately leaked this story. The question is why now? Camilla had been wondering the same thing. The timing seemed deliberate, coming just as she was beginning to establish some stability in her new life. It felt like someone was determined to ensure she could never find peace, never move on from the humiliation of her exile. The answer came that evening when Charles finally called. His voice was distant and formal, lacking any of the warmth that had once characterized their conversations. I understand there's been some unwanted media attention, he said without preamble. That's one way to put it. Charles, how did this happen? Someone with access to palace information gave them details about my departure and my current location. I'm sure I don't know. These things have a way of getting out, unfortunately. These things don't just get out. Someone deliberately sabotaged my attempt to live quietly. Was it you? The silence that followed was answer enough. Camilla felt her heart breaking all over again, not just from the betrayal, but from the cold calculation it represented. Why? She asked quietly. I've done everything you asked. I left without a fight. I've maintained complete discretion about the circumstances, and I've stayed away from any activity that might embarrass the royal family. Why destroy the only peace I've been able to find? The situation is more complicated than you understand, Charles said stiffly. There are considerations beyond your personal comfort that must be taken into account. What considerations? What possible benefit could there be in making my life impossible? The public perception of the monarchy requires careful management. Having you settled comfortably in the countryside, playing the role of contented exile, sends the wrong message about accountability and consequences. The callousness of his words struck her like a physical blow. She was being kept in a state of public disgrace to serve the royal family's narrative about justice and moral standards. Her suffering was a political tool. You want me to suffer publicly, she said, understanding finally dawning. You need me to appear broken and remorseful so the public feels that appropriate punishment has been served. I want you to understand the gravity of the situation and behave accordingly. Your attempts to establish a normal life suggest a lack of proper contrition. Contrition for what? Camilla wanted to ask, but she already knew the answer. Her crime wasn't anything she had done wrong. It was simply existing as a reminder of the royal family's human frailties and poor judgment. She was the inconvenient evidence of their mistakes, and she could never be forgiven for that. I see. So what happens now? Do I spend the rest of my life being hunted from place to place, never allowed to settle or find peace. That's entirely up to you. If you choose to maintain a low profile and accept the consequences of past decisions, arrangements can be made for your continued comfort and privacy. And if I choose to defend myself publicly? If I decide to tell my side of the story? The threat in his silence was unmistakable. Camilla realized she was being offered a devil's bargain, perpetual exile in exchange for silence, or complete destruction if she chose to fight back. After he hung up, she sat in the growing darkness of her sitting room, listening to the reporters setting up camp outside her sanctuary. Their voices carried through the night air, discussing camera angles and interview requests as if she were a criminal hiding from justice rather than a woman trying to rebuild her life. Janet found her there hours later, still sitting in the same chair, staring out at the lights from the media encampment. "You can't give up," Janet said firmly. "Not after everything you've overcome to get this far." "I don't think I have a choice. They've made it clear that I'll never be allowed to live normally. Every time I try to start over, they'll tear it down again." "Then, stop trying to hide. Stop apologizing for existing. If they're going to make your life miserable regardless, at least make it on your own terms." Camilla looked at her friend with new interest. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting you stop playing by their rules. They want you to suffer in silence to protect their image. But what if you chose not to cooperate? What if you decided to tell your story instead of letting them control the narrative?" The idea was both terrifying and exhilarating. For months, Camilla had accepted her punishment with dignity, hoping that good behavior would eventually earn her forgiveness. But forgiveness was never going to come. They needed her to remain a cautionary tale, forever paying for her association with their failures. "The consequences could be severe," she said slowly. "They have resources I can't match, and they've made it clear they're willing to use them. Maybe, but they also have something to lose now. If you've been as discreet as you claim, then you know things that could embarrass them. The threat goes both ways." Camilla spent the night considering her options. By morning, the media presence outside her cottage had tripled. News vans lined the narrow country lane. Reporters had set up a temporary camp on the village green, and helicopters circled overhead taking aerial photographs of her property. Mrs. Whitfield called to inform her that the post office was under siege, and Father Michael reported that journalists had tried to enter the church during morning prayers, hoping to catch her at worship. The entire community was being disrupted by her presence, exactly as she had feared. It was Mrs. Thornsby's call that finally crystallized her decision. The elderly woman was calling to cancel Thursday's book club meeting because several members were afraid to venture out with so many reporters in the village. "I'm so sorry, dear," Mrs. Thornsby said sadly. "We all understand it's not your fault, but some of the ladies are quite frightened by all the commotion." "No, Mrs. Thornsby, I'm the one who should apologize. I've brought this chaos to your peaceful community, and that's unforgivable." "Nonsense. You're one of us now, and we don't abandon our own just because outsiders are making trouble." The loyalty and kindness in the elderly woman's voice brought tears to Camilla's eyes. These people barely knew her, yet they were willing to stand by her in the face of unprecedented disruption to their quiet lives. That afternoon, Camilla made a decision that would change everything. She called a London publicist she had worked with during her royal years and arranged to hold a press conference the following day. If the media wanted a story, she would give them one. But it would be her story, told in her words, on her terms. "Are you certain about this?" Janet asked as they prepared for what would likely be their last evening at Rosemary Cottage. "I'm certain that I'm tired of being a victim. They've taken my home, my work, and my dignity. But they haven't taken my voice, and I think it's time I remembered how to use it." That night, as she prepared her statement for the press conference, Camilla felt something she hadn't experienced since leaving the palace. She felt powerful. For months, she had been reacting to other people's decisions about her life. Tomorrow, she would finally take control of her own narrative. The consequences would be severe, she knew. But the alternative, a lifetime of exile and silence, was no longer acceptable. If she was going to be destroyed, it would be on her own terms, fighting for her right to exist and rebuild rather than cowering in perpetual shame. As dawn broke over Little Thornfield, Camilla Parker Bowles prepared for the most important battle of her life. The morning of the press conference dawned crisp and clear, as if the weather itself was declaring a fresh start. Camilla stood before her bedroom mirror, carefully choosing her outfit for what she knew would be the most important public appearance of her life. She selected a simple but elegant navy dress, professional, dignified, but not apologetic. Today, She would not be dressing to please anyone but herself. Janet helped her with final preparations, both women understanding the magnitude of what was about to unfold. The media circus outside had grown overnight, with international news crews now joining the British reporters who had descended on Little Thornfield. The village had been transformed into a temporary media city, complete with satellite trucks, catering vans, and security barriers. "You don't have to do this," Janet said one final time as they prepared to leave for London. "There's still time to change your mind, to find another quiet refuge somewhere else." "No," Camilla replied with quiet determination. "I've spent my entire adult life adjusting my behavior to meet other people's expectations. First as an army wife, then as a royal spouse, and finally, as a disgraced exile. I'm done being shaped by other people's needs." The drive to London took place in a convoy of vehicles, Camilla's car flanked by security personnel and followed by a stream of media vehicles determined not to lose sight of their quarry. As they approached the outskirts of the city, Camilla felt her resolve strengthen rather than weaken. Each mile brought her closer to reclaiming her own voice. The press conference was being held at a prestigious hotel in central London, chosen specifically for its symbolic distance from royal venues. Camilla's publicist, Miranda Walsh, had worked through the night to coordinate what promised to be one of the most watched media events of the year. "The response has been extraordinary," Miranda informed her as they arrived at the hotel. "We have representatives from major news organizations worldwide. This is your moment to set the record straight. But remember, once you start talking, there's no taking any of it back." Camilla nodded, understanding the irreversible nature of what she was about to do. For months, she had maintained dignified silence about the circumstances of her departure from royal life. Today, that silence would end forever. The hotel's ballroom had been transformed into a media center, with rows of chairs facing a simple podium adorned with microphones. As Camilla entered from a side door, the room fell silent with anticipation. Hundreds of cameras captured her every movement as she approached the podium with measured steps. She looked out at the sea of faces, reporters she had known during her royal years, photographers who had chronicled both her triumphs and failures, television anchors who would carry her words around the world. For the first time in months, she felt completely in control of her own narrative. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice clear and steady. "I've called this press conference to address the speculation and misinformation that has surrounded my departure from public life, and to set the record straight about my current circumstances." She paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle over the room. Every person present understood they were witnessing a moment that would reshape the public understanding of recent royal history. 3 months ago, I was informed by representatives of the royal household that my continued residence at the palace was no longer appropriate. This was not a decision I made, nor was it one I was consulted about. I was given less than 24 hours to pack my belongings and leave the home I had shared with my husband for over a decade. A murmur rippled through the audience. The official royal statement had carefully implied that her withdrawal from public life had been voluntary, a mutual decision reached amicably by all parties involved. I was relocated to a property in the countryside and told that my best course of action would be to maintain a low profile while the royal family managed the public perception of my departure. I was assured that if I cooperated fully and avoided any actions that might embarrass the institution, arrangements would be made for my continued comfort and privacy. Camilla's voice remained steady, but there was an underlying current of steel that hadn't been present during her years of carefully modulated royal statements. For 3 months, I honored that agreement. I made no public statements, granted no interviews, and sought no platform to defend myself against the various theories about my supposed failures and shortcomings. I believed that dignity and discretion would eventually be rewarded with the quiet life I had been promised. She looked directly into the camera that would carry her words to television screens around the world, speaking directly to the millions of people who had formed opinions about her based on incomplete and often deliberately misleading information. However, it has become clear that my silence was never intended to lead to peace. Yesterday's leak of private information about my living arrangements and the circumstances of my departure was not an accident. It was a calculated decision to ensure that I could never establish the quiet, private life that had been promised to me. The revelation sent a shock through the room. Reporters began scribbling notes furiously, understanding that they were witnessing the first direct challenge to the official royal narrative in decades. I have been informed by sources within the palace that my apparent contentment in exile was sending the wrong message about accountability and consequences. My crime, it seems, is not anything I have done wrong, but simply my existence as a reminder of decisions that the royal family would prefer the public forget. Camilla paused to take a sip of water, using the moment to gauge the reaction in the room. She could see shock, fascination, and growing anticipation on the faces before her. I am told that my happiness suggests a lack of proper contrition, that my attempts to rebuild my life demonstrate insufficient understanding of the gravity of my situation. In short, I am expected to suffer publicly and permanently to serve someone else's political narrative. Her voice grew stronger with each revelation, years of suppressed frustration and hurt finally finding expression. I reject that role. I refuse to spend the remainder of my life as a cautionary tale, forever paying for the crime of having loved unwisely and trusted too completely. I will not be the human sacrifice offered to appease public opinion about the royal family's judgment and character. The room was completely silent now, every person present understanding that they were witnessing something unprecedented in modern royal history. I want to be clear about something. I harbor no ill will toward the institution of the monarchy or toward most of the individuals within it. I understand the pressures they face and the impossible balance they must maintain between personal desires and public duty. But I will no longer allow my life to be collateral damage in that balance. Camilla reached into her folder and withdrew a thick document. Today, I am releasing a detailed account of my experiences as a member of the royal family, including previously undisclosed information about the circumstances that led to my departure. This memoir will be published next month, with all proceeds going to literacy charities that I will support privately, without royal patronage or publicity. The announcement caused an immediate stir. Royal memoirs were incredibly rare, and none had ever been published by someone who had been forced out of the family under controversial circumstances. I want to address directly the question of loyalty and discretion that I know will be raised. For 15 years, I served the crown with absolute dedication. I performed every duty asked of me, supported every decision made about my role, and maintained complete confidentiality about private family matters, even when that silence came at considerable personal cost. Her voice took on a harder edge as she continued. However, loyalty must be mutual to be meaningful. When it became clear that my discretion was being exploited to enable my continued persecution, that loyalty was forfeited. I will not protect people who refuse to show me basic human decency. She looked around the room, making eye contact with several journalists she had known for years. I know there will be attempts to discredit what I'm telling you today. You'll be told that I'm bitter, vindictive, or mentally unstable. You'll be given carefully crafted statements that paint me as an unreliable narrator seeking attention or financial gain. I expect nothing less. Camilla's smile was sad but determined. But I ask you to consider this. If I were truly the problem, if my character were truly as flawed as has been suggested, why was I kept in royal service for over a decade? Why was I allowed to represent the crown at hundreds of public events? Why was I entrusted with significant charitable responsibilities if I was fundamentally unsuitable for royal life? The question hung in the air, challenging the narrative that had been carefully constructed around her departure. The truth is that I was useful as long as I was needed, and disposable when I became inconvenient. I was a suitable royal spouse when public opinion required someone to blame for past decisions, and an unsuitable exile when my recovery threatened to undermine the lesson my suffering was meant to teach. She closed the folder and stepped back from the podium slightly. I am here today not to destroy anyone, but to save myself. I am 45 years old, and I refuse to spend the next 40 years of my life as a prisoner of other people's political needs. I have done nothing criminal, nothing immoral, and nothing that countless others in similar positions haven't done. I will not continue to be punished for having been human. The room erupted in a cacophony of shouted questions as Camilla prepared to leave the podium. She raised her hand for silence. I will not be taking questions today, as I believe my statement has been comprehensive. However, I will be available for selected interviews over the coming weeks, and my book will provide far more detail about the experiences I've touched on today. She paused for one final statement. To the people of Little Thornfield who welcomed me with such kindness, I apologize for the disruption my presence has caused. You showed me what genuine community and acceptance look like, and I will never forget that gift. As she walked away from the podium, Camilla felt lighter than she had in months. The weight of enforced silence had been lifted, replaced by the exhilarating freedom of having spoken her truth. Behind her, the room erupted in chaos as reporters scrambled to file their stories and analyze the implications of what they had just heard. Miranda met her at the side door, her expression a mixture of admiration and concern. "Well, you've certainly burned your bridges," she said. "There's no going back now." "Good," Camilla replied. "I never want to go back. I only want to go forward." The immediate reaction was explosive. Within hours, her press conference was the lead story on every major news outlet around the world. Social media platforms buzzed with debate about her revelations, with public opinion sharply divided between those who saw her as a victim of institutional cruelty and those who viewed her as a disloyal opportunist seeking revenge. The palace's response was swift and predictable. A carefully worded statement expressed regret about private family matters being aired publicly and emphasized the royal family's commitment to dignity and service above personal grievances. But, for the first time, Camilla's voice was part of the conversation rather than being silenced by it. That evening, safe in a London hotel room, Camilla watched the news coverage with Janet beside her. The woman who had entered the press conference as a disgraced exile had emerged as something entirely different, a person who had chosen agency over victimhood, voice over silence. "What happens now?" Janet asked. Camilla looked out at the city lights, thinking about all the possibilities that lay ahead. For the first time in months, her future was truly her own to determine. "Now we find out what I'm capable of when nobody's trying to control me," she said with a smile. "I think it might be quite remarkable." The next morning brought news that surprised even Camilla's supporters. 3 major publishers were engaged in a bidding war for her memoir, and her revelations about royal family dynamics had prompted calls for parliamentary inquiries into the transparency of palace operations. More importantly for Camilla personally, messages of support began pouring in from unexpected sources. Former royal staff members contacted her privately to corroborate her accounts. Charities she had worked with expressed continued interest in her involvement. International women's rights organizations invited her to speak about institutional oppression and personal resilience. For the first time since leaving the palace, Camilla Parker Bowles had work to do, meaningful, chosen work that nobody could take away from her. The woman who had been silenced and exiled was becoming a voice for others who had faced similar institutional betrayals. As she began work on her memoir, Camilla reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. The palace had tried to break her spirit by taking away her home, her work, and her dignity. Instead, they had freed her to discover a strength and independence she never knew she possessed. The exile they had intended as punishment had become the foundation for a new kind of power, the power of someone with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. And Camilla Parker Bowles was just getting started.